Hey everybody, welcome to the first video on tuples. So tuple, which is spelled like this, or tuples, is very much like a list. So a list is just a whole bunch of values that are stored inside one name or one variable. So we use one variable to access all of these different values or elements. So if I made a list, I might make something like this. Okay, and if I made a tuple, I would actually do something very similar, but I might do something like this. Okay, so this is going to be name, age, and height in centimeters. So you're looking at this right now and you're saying, wow, there is a difference. I put curved versus square bracket. Okay, so that's the big difference here. But if I want to print out, say, their name from this list, or I want to print out the name from this tuple, I actually use the square bracket on both of them. I don't use a curved bracket because that could be confused with being a function. So if I print these, I get Tim and I get Lily. And a tuple accesses the elements in exactly the same way that a list does. So if I were to do something like for item in A and print out A, it's gonna print out item, not A, print out item, it's gonna print out those. And if I just change this to B, it's gonna print out those. So accessing elements in a tuple and a list are exactly the same thing. So there's no difference. So what is the difference? Why do we even have tuples? Well, it comes down to an important word we learned in the last video, which was mutable, which means that values can change. And the opposite is immutable, and values cannot change. Okay, so in a list, which is mutable, because we learned that last time, and a tuple, which is immutable. Okay, so we're going to learn why we would want something that can't change in a minute. But for now, let's take a look at kind of what that means. So let's go ahead and first let's try to change Tim's name to Timothy. So let's say I say 0, and I say I want Timothy now. And I do print A. Okay, so if I run this, you'll see that the name has changed. It's now Timothy. But if I change this to B, and let's say I don't want Lily, but I want Liliana, okay, and I try to run this, I get tuple object does not support item assignment, which means you can't use the assignment operator to put things into the tuple because it is immutable and values cannot change. So using the equal sign here makes no sense to Python. It says you can't do that, and it gives you a type error because this is type tuple and you're trying to use an assignment. Okay, so let's look at something else then. Let's say that I want to append something. So let's say I want to put on a weight. So I want to say that Tim is 80 kilos. And now I print out A. If I run this, I now have 80 kilos that are on here. Okay, so I print 80 kilos extra for Tim. But if I change this to be a B and I try to print out the tuple, if I run this, I'm going to get attribute error. Tuple does not have the attribute append. It can't get any longer in length or any shorter in length because it is immutable. It can't change. Okay, so I think I've hopefully driven home the point that once you make a tuple, it is done, it is made, that is final. Now, that doesn't mean you can't add something onto a tuple, but you have to do it by actually creating a brand new tuple. So let's say I make a tuple here, and I want to make Lily's weight in kilograms 50. Now, if you make a tuple with a single element, okay, it'll run. But let's print this out here. You're gonna notice that it says class int. So if I do this, it sees this as an int, and you're saying, well, that's weird. But look, I have I have single parentheses here. I have these parentheses. They're curved. It should be a tuple, right? Well, you need a comma to make something a tuple. This is just seeing this as an expression, kind of like if I said 50 times 2, but I forgot to put the times 2 in there. It's just seeing it as an expression, and it's calculating this and now giving me 50 as an integer. So if I want to make this a tuple with one thing, I now have to put a comma. If I run this, it's now a class tuple because that comma's in there. Okay, so int tuple, totally different. Okay, so if I wanted to here, I could actually then make a new tuple, and I could say b plus c, and then I could print out d, and if I do this, I'll have added something on to the tuple. So it kind of looks like I've actually changed the tuple, but I haven't, because in actuality there is still b and there is still c. Those tuples still exist. I just made a brand new tuple and added something onto it. So that's really an important point, is that you can get rid of a tuple, you can delete a tuple, but you can't change it while it exists. Alright, because it is immutable. Alright, so let's go on to why we would even want this. It seems kind of stupid to have a list which can do so much more than a tuple can do, but using a tuple which isn't really all that flexible. So there's two things. One, when you make a list, you generally want the list the same type. So lists by convention are the same type. So we have made lists with different things in it, and you can do that, and you are welcome to do that. Python lets you do that. But usually by convention, meaning by the rules of the game, so to speak, you want the list to have all the same type of elements. And that's because if you're accessing things in a list or adding and taking things away, you want to know what type you're taking away. You don't have to check each time. Okay. Tuples by convention are different types. So that doesn't mean they have to be different types, but they often are different types. So you might have a situation like this where you have a string and, you know, two integers there. Okay. So by convention are, I'll put are or can be different types. You don't need to have different types. Tuples can be used with same types or different types. Now, there are two good reasons that you want to do this. And this is really one of the first good reasons, is you have something that works by type. So that is kind of something that where you can order things. If you have a list, you can put things there in order. If it's a list of strings, you can put them in alphabetical order. If it's a list of numbers, you can put them in numerical order. Tuples, though, so I'm going to put this out here. Let's go ahead and put by order. And a tuple, though, is by structure. So if I'm making tuples, I might be making 1,000 tuples for all the students in a school, or all in like a university, and I would put name, age, and height for whatever reason. Okay, and that's the structure of that tuple. So tuples, the structure is very, very important, but in lists, the order is often very important, and you want to put things in a certain order, you want to sort them, or you want to search through it for something. Okay, so you don't need to worry about it with lists, but most of the time that is important. The other thing that is important, and this is more of a technical detail, is that lists take longer to create in memory and take up more memory. So when you make a list, let's say this list A here, when the computer actually creates this list, what it does is it creates a bunch of extra space at the end of the list, okay, or in the list somewhere. It gives the list extra space in memory, which takes a little more time to set up, and lists can be a little more flexible because of this. Because it's expecting you to add elements in there at some point, expecting you to use a pen and put things in. So when you create a list, it actually takes up more space because it's expecting you to use the mutable feature of the list to change the list at some point. And it's going to need computer memory to work with. It's going to need some RAM or something like that. Now, we haven't really talked about that. This is before the fundamentals section, depending on how you've done these tutorials in the order. If you understand what I mean when I'm saying, RAM or memory, that's great. If you don't, just think of it as the space in the computer that stores the code that's being run. With a tuple, it doesn't create this extra space because you can't create any more values in the tuple because the tuple is, yes, immutable. Okay, so that's the difference between a list and a tuple. Tuples oftentimes, though, are stored in lists. So you might have a list of tuples, but all of those tuples in that list would have the same structure. And maybe all of those tuples in that list are sorted in some order based on one of the elements of the tuple. So I might have a list of names, 1,000 names in the school, and in ages and heights, and I put them in tuples and I put them inside of a list. Okay? And we're going to look at doing that in the next video when I show you how to go inside of a list to get elements of a tuple and kind of what we might use that for. Alright, so if you have questions on tuples, leave it in the comments. Tuples are pretty much lists, but you just can't change them. If that's the most you get out of this video, then that's probably going to get you about halfway there to really understanding tuples. So we'll look in the next video at just kind of doing some examples with tuples, putting them in lists, and doing some other things with them as well, such as unpacking them and things. Okay, so see you in the next video, and yep, questions on the YouTube comments or on the site. All right, see you soon.